A century ago, on the soil of America, a battle raged, not with the thunder of cannons nor the clash of swords, but with dreams, sweat, and unstoppable power. It was a war that reshaped the nation's economy, its identity, and its destiny. From the depths of the earth, iron was pulled out and transformed into blazing steel, flowing from Pittsburgh's furnaces into the veins of the nation. This steel bound bridges across mighty rivers, raised skyscrapers that touched the clouds, and laid down railroads that stitched America from coast to coast. This was the era of the Steelers, the men who turned the strength of the earth into the backbone of a rising empire. Yet, at the very same time, in another corner of America, a different dream was taking flight. Above the skyline of New York, roaring jets sliced through the heavens, carrying with them the promise of a new future. Airports shimmered with light, pilots' eyes glowed with ambition, and the dream of conquering the skies became America's new frontier. This was the rise of the jets, the power of the air, breaking the chains of earth and opening the path to supremacy in the skies. It was not merely a clash of industries or technology, but a symbolic war of elements, land versus sky, steel versus jet. And today, we remember it by a name both modern and timeless: Steelers versus Jets. In the early 20th century, the city of Pittsburgh, located in America's industrial heartland, became the beating engine of a nation in transformation. This city was the soul of iron and steel production. Its factories never slept, furnaces roared day and night, black smoke curled endlessly into the sky, and workers drenched in sweat poured their strength into creating the metal that would define America's destiny. This steel was not just material, it was the backbone of progress. It became the bridges that spanned mighty rivers, the railroads that stitched the nation from coast to coast, and the foundations of skyscrapers that pierced the clouds. The streets of Pittsburgh might have been grimy, cloaked in soot and smoke, but its people knew they were part of something greater. Their sweat and labor fueled a new era of prosperity. The world began to recognize America as the steel empire, and this reputation was not merely industrial, it was symbolic of national power. This was the age of the Steelers, the workers who were hailed as unsung heroes. Ordinary men, yet from their hands flowed the steel that shaped a nation. Every bridge, every building, every weapon of war, and even the factories that produced new machines, all bore the hidden imprint of their labor. They harnessed the strength of the earth, melted it in blazing furnaces, and forged it into the tools of a rising civilization. It was more than an industry, it was a cultural revolution. The power of steel gave America internal strength and positioned it before the world as an emerging superpower. The workers of Pittsburgh may not have realized it at the time, but their endless toil was laying the foundation of a kingdom of steel, one that would shape global destiny for decades to come. While Pittsburgh's furnaces roared day and night, forging the steel that built America's foundations, another revolution was quietly taking shape along the nation's eastern coast. This was the age of aviation. In 1903, when the Wright brothers launched their first fragile aircraft into the skies, America broke the chains of the earth and began to dream of claiming the heavens as its new dominion. Within just a few decades, New York and its surrounding regions had become the cradle of this soaring ambition. During the 1920s and 1930s, while much of the world still relied heavily on land routes and ocean voyages, America turned the skies into its greatest weapon. New York's airports expanded rapidly, glowing with long stretches of runways lined with dazzling lights. The thunder of jet engines, the shimmering horizon above the city, and the gleam in the eyes of young pilots all declared the dawn of a new era. America was no longer just a nation built on steel. It was preparing to dominate the skies. This was the moment when the jets became more than machines. They became a symbol of speed, of freedom, of unmatched power. Aircraft were no longer merely tools of transportation, they were emblems of national strength and global supremacy. During World War II, America's air power demonstrated to the world that the one who ruled the skies also held the decisive power over the earth. Thus, the jets became the union of America's dreams and reality. For those who yearned to touch the infinite sky, the dream was no longer distant. From the runways of New York, these roaring machines weren't just tearing through clouds, they were rewriting the destiny of a nation. Between the 1950s and 1970s, America stood at a critical and decisive crossroads. On one side, the steel industry of Pittsburgh still roared with power. Its furnaces poured out the iron backbone of the nation, shaping railroads, bridges, skyscrapers, and the weapons of war. On the other side, the runways of New York and the airfields across the nation thundered with the ascent of jets, heralding a new vision of the future. The question loomed large: would America's destiny be rooted in the strength of the earth, or would it soar into the skies? This was, in truth, a silent war between two forces within the same nation. The fires of the steel mills glowed with the sweat of laborers, yet the engines of the jets roared with the promise of tomorrow. While steel bound rivers with mighty bridges, jets drew continents closer together. While factories filled the skies with dark smoke, jets pierced the clouds and rose toward the light of the sun. It was not merely an industrial struggle. It was the very debate over America's direction. Steel had given the nation its strength on the ground, but jets were preparing to make it a global superpower. Politicians, industrialists, and ordinary citizens all wrestled with the same question: will steel remain our strength, or will the conquest of the skies define our future? This era can rightly be remembered as the true foundation of Steelers versus Jets. Not a clash on the football field, but a deeper battle of industry and technology, where earth and sky stood face to face in a struggle to shape the destiny of a nation. As the decades rolled on, the answer to the great question of the 1950s and 1960s slowly began to reveal itself. The steel industry, which had once made America the strongest nation on the ground, started to weaken. By the 1970s, global markets shifted. Cheaper labor overseas, the rise of new industries, and modern technologies pushed Pittsburgh's mighty furnaces toward silence. One by one, the roaring mills cooled, and the glowing skies that once lit up entire cities dimmed into darkness. Workers who had once carried pride in their sweat now faced unemployment and despair. The golden age of steel, which had forged America's foundation, was slipping into the shadows of history. On the other side, the jets, the world of aviation and aerospace, began lifting America to new heights. In 1969, when Neil Armstrong stepped onto the surface of the moon, it was not just a triumph of science, it was the declaration of a new destiny. America was no longer a nation defined by what it could build on land, but by how far it could soar into the heavens. Boeing jets connected continents, NASA rockets pierced the atmosphere, and the New York skyline glittered as a symbol of modern progress. This was the moment when the nation's destiny transformed. Steel had given America its backbone, but jets gave it wings. Without steel, the nation might never have stood strong; without jets, it could never have become a global superpower. The battle between the furnaces of Pittsburgh and the runways of New York revealed a timeless truth: the sources of power change with every era. Once, the strength of iron built empires; later, the conquest of skies redefined them. Thus, a new chapter of the Steelers versus Jets saga was written, not just on the football field, but in the very heart of America's evolution, where the decline of steel and the rise of jets shaped the identity of a nation and the direction of the world. In America's race for progress, there was another side of the story, one that history often forgets. These were the workers, the families, and the communities whose lives were built around the steel industry. When the mills closed their doors, it was not only machines that went silent but entire cities that fell into despair. Industrial centers like Pittsburgh, once proudly called the Steel City, became stories of broken dreams. The workers who had once stood proudly beside roaring furnaces now faced unemployment and hunger. Children who had seen their fathers labor in fire and smoke now grew up under the shadow of poverty and fading hope. These struggles, these sacrifices, found little space in the grand pages of history. Meanwhile, in New York and Washington, the spotlight shined brightly on jets and rockets. Television screens celebrated space missions, air shows, and glittering flights, while the pain of forgotten workers remained hidden in the shadows. It was a stark contrast. On one side, a nation dreaming of the stars, on the other, communities fighting just to survive. This forgotten struggle represented the human side of the Steelers versus Jets story. It was never just about industry versus technology, but about people whose destinies were caught in between. On one side stood the dream of touching the skies, and on the other, the harsh reality of holding on to life on the ground. Thus, Steelers versus Jets became more than a tale of industrial might and technological progress. It became a deeply human story, a story of forgotten sacrifices, broken communities, and the silent price of progress. If we view this entire story as a symbol, then Steelers versus Jets reflects the eternal struggle between the earth and the sky that reshaped America. Steel, drawn from the depths of the earth, represented labor, sweat, and survival. It stood for strength, roots, and endurance. On the other hand, jets became symbols of the vast sky, of dreams, progress, and the pursuit of new horizons. When these two forces stood face to face, it was as if two philosophies collided. One believed that power comes from the ground, the other that true strength lies in conquering the skies. Steel gave the nation the foundation on which everything was built, but jets gave it wings to dominate across the world. This clash was not only industrial or technological, it was cultural, ideological, and deeply tied to America's identity. The glowing furnaces of Pittsburgh and the roaring runways of New York became metaphors for two worlds, one rooted in memory, labor, and the sweat of the past. The other soaring toward the promises and uncertainties of the future. This clash served as a reminder that progress never follows a straight line, it is always born from the tension between opposing forces. Thus, Steelers versus Jets became a symbolic battle, where the strength of the earth and the freedom of the skies stood in opposition, together shaping the unique destiny of a nation. As time moved forward, the steel furnaces grew colder, and the jets soared higher, yet the story of Steelers versus Jets became permanently etched into America's collective memory. Even today, Pittsburgh is still called the Steel City, though most of its factories have long fallen silent. The name itself stands as a reminder of the sacrifice and labor that built the very foundation of the nation. On the other side, New York's airports, Boeing's airplanes, and NASA's launch pads continue to demonstrate how jets lifted America into the skies and onto the global stage. This legacy is not just a memory of the past, it is also a lesson for the future. It teaches us that progress always demands a price, sometimes sweat, sometimes dreams, and sometimes sacrifice. Without steel, America would not have had the backbone to rise, and without jets, it could not have become a superpower. Though these two forces seemed opposed, they were in truth two sides of the same story. Today, when we hear Steelers versus Jets, it is no longer just the name of a football matchup, it is a cultural symbol. It recalls a time when earth and sky stood face to face, and America forged its destiny by drawing strength from both. Thus, Steelers versus Jets is not only a tale of the past but also a message for the future, that any nation which combines the strength of the ground with the dreams of the sky has the power to change the course of history.